up on this edition, President Park Geun-hye sits down with her Uzbek counterpart to talk business cooperation between the two countries in energy, textiles, and transportation. As Islamic militants continue their advance in Iraq, the U.S. is moving more firepower into the region. And moving on to Brazil for 2014 World Cup updates. Team Korea's first match against Russia is scheduled for Wednesday, 7 a.m. Korea time. Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining me tonight. President Park Geun-hye met for summit talks with Uzbek President Islam Karimov on this Tuesday. In a joint statement, the two leaders agreed to bolster their political, economic, and cultural relations. On the economic front, a number of MOUs were signed. Our Choi Yoo-sun sent this report from Tashkent.
President Park's state visit to Uzbekistan this week comes as Korea looks to expand business projects with its #1 Central Asian trading partner. In 2013, Korea and Uzbekistan traded goods totaling some $2 billion. With a Korean stake of more than $8 billion in Uzbek gas field development and chemical complex construction projects, President Park and their Uzbek counterpart Islam Karimov agreed to expand cooperation in the areas of energy, textiles, and transportation. Sewol asked for Tashkent's support for Korean businesses taking part in a $4 billion Uzbek gas development and processing plant and in the construction of a $300 million solar plant in Samarkand. Uzbekistan's solar power industry holds great potential thanks to the country's great exposure to sunlight. The two leaders also talked about Korea helping to develop an Uzbek electronic government administrative system and signing a deal to build a textile complex in the country, which is the world's #6 cotton producer. President Park also asked that Korean firms be granted permission to take part in an Uzbek highway construction as part of a 5-year transportation infrastructure development project. The Uzbek leader also endorsed President Park's Eurasia initiative, which aims to reconnect the Far East and Europe through Central Asia by linking energy and logistics infrastructure across the continent. The next stop on President Park's Eurasia Initiative campaign tour is Samarkand, a city that was at the heart of the Silk Road. She'll then travel to Kazakhstan Wednesday for a 3-day state visit. Choi Yoo-sun, ARIRANG News, Tashkent.
Amid the firestorm surrounding President Park Geun-hye's pick for a prime minister over controversial remarks that he's made over the years, the presidential office postponed submitting the confirmation motion on this Tuesday. And as our Ji Myung-gil reports, lawmakers are likely to make the process very much unpleasant for the designate.
Prime Minister nominee Moon Chang-geuk's apology for controversial remarks he made years back about Japan's colonization of the Korean peninsula doesn't go far enough for the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, or NPAD.
Japan's colonization remains the biggest scar for the Korean people. We cannot nominate a prime minister who has a distorted view of history. If the government proceeds with the confirmation hearings, it will be criticized for lacking common sense.
Should the presidential office push ahead with Moon's nomination, some NPAD lawmakers say they would consider boycotting the confirmation hearing in protest. And the negative views of the prime minister nominee aren't reserved for the opposition party. 6 first-term lawmakers of the ruling Saenuri Party have issued statements calling for Moon to withdraw his nomination, while a number of more experienced lawmakers have openly criticized him. But the ruling party's floor leader Lee Won-gu plans to go ahead with the confirmation process.
There seem to be suspicions and doubts about the Prime Minister nominee, but the National Assembly has a duty to proceed with the confirmation hearing and evaluate whether the candidate is suitable.
The National Assembly will ultimately hold a plenary vote on Moon's nomination, which would require the attendance of at least 143 lawmakers. To be confirmed, Moon would need at least half of those in attendance to vote yes. Once the National Assembly receives a formal request calling for a confirmation hearing, lawmakers are required to hold one within 20 days. Ji Myung-gil, ARIRANG News.
The 15 crew members of the sunken Sewol ferry were back in court on this Tuesday to answer to the charges against them and claimed that it was not up to them to save passengers in the sinking ship, but rather the Coast Guard. The defense attorneys for the accused, who face charges ranging from homicide to negligence, said that once the Coast Guard arrived on the scene, the crew's job was done. The captain of the vessel, Lee Jun-suk, and 3 of his senior crew face charges of homicide by willful negligence and are looking at a possible sentence of the death penalty. Tuesday's court session was the second since the trial opened last week. Search operations, meanwhile, on the sunken ferry continue with 12 people still unaccounted for and 292 people confirmed dead.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to The OECD advised Korea to carefully consider costs and benefits of further accumulation of foreign exchange reserves, something that sounded like a warning to the Korean economy that's been boasting record stockpiles. Hwang Ji-hye tells us more.
The OECD has told Korea to take a careful approach to more foreign reserves. In its latest report on the Korean economy released Tuesday, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development said that foreign exchange reserves are a costly way to fight against foreign exchange volatility. It said that's because foreign reserves are typically invested in safe assets with low returns. Instead, the international organization recommended swap agreements that allow related parties to exchange cash flows for a set period of time. Korea's central bank said earlier this month that the nation's foreign reserves reached an all-time high of over $360 billion as of the end of last month, marking the 7th largest foreign reserves in the world, following China, Japan, and Switzerland. The OECD report went on to say that the Korean economy is on an upturn trend after a period of subdued output growth in 2011 and 2012, but added that easing monetary policies and short-term extra budget could take place. This when threats to the domestic economy like the nation's household debt problem and instability in emerging markets continue to weigh on Korea. The OECD expects the Korean economy to grow 4% this year and 4.2% next year, and added a strong Korean won trend could benefit local consumers by reducing prices of imported goods and rebalancing toward domestic demand, one of the main economic agendas of the current administration. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Standard Chartered Korea is cutting its losses on its capital financing and savings bank units. The British banking group has announced that it is selling off 100% stakes in Standard Chartered Capital and Standard Chartered Savings Bank to Japan-based J Trust Company for $148 million, pending approval, of course, by Korea's financial regulator. Since entering the Korean market back in 2005, Standard Chartered has faced a tough competition here in the local market and incurred financial losses. The group announced earlier this year that it would close 50 branches by the end of the year. The value of Korea's stock market has fallen a notch compared to last year, settling as the world's 12th largest market. Some are attributing this to the comparative rise of the Indian market and so-called Modinomics. Na Hyun-kyung tells us more.
The combined market capitalization of Korea's publicly listed companies crossed $1.2 trillion as of the end of last week. Citing Bloomberg data, Yonhap News reports that Korea took one step back from last year when its market was the 11th biggest in the world. Analysts say capital is flowing to other emerging economies in Asia, especially to India, where new Prime Minister Narendra Modi is pledging sweeping economic reforms. Thanks to his so-called Modinomics, India's benchmark Sensex has jumped 19% so far this year, with the total market value surging nearly 30%. Korea's main index, the Kospi, edged down 1% this year, and although total market capitalization went up by 4%, the actual increase will be lower because of the strengthening won. The Korean market currently makes up 1.9% of the global market. That's down 0.1 percentage points from last month and down 0.4 percentage points from August 2011, when it was at its highest. Experts say foreign buyers are moving their money away from Korea because they feel that Samsung Electronics, the major player on the Kospi, is not pushing for growth as strongly as they could. Another reason is said to be the weaker than expected performances by Korea's usual strongholds, the shipbuilding and petrochemical industries, which rely heavily on exports to China. 나현경, 아리랑 뉴스.
Fresh off North Korea's recent announcement that it would be sending athletes to the upcoming Asian Games in the South Korean port city of Incheon, speculation has emerged that the South and North Korean teams could join forces and play as a single unit. Seoul's Unification Ministry said Tuesday that it was reviewing the possibility upon the request of Incheon City as well as the Asian Games Organizing Committee. It was just 2 months ago, though, when the ministry dismissed the idea, calling it inappropriate considering current tensions on the Korean peninsula. North Korea plans to send 150 athletes to compete in 14 different sports at the Games, which open in Incheon on September 19th.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are enjoying the World Cup Brazil 2014. Now, starting off with the latest game that ended on this Tuesday morning. The U.S. team scored easily the fastest goal so far at this year's World Cup in what turned out to be a thrilling and explosive match. It took Captain Clint Dempsey just 30 seconds to put the ball in the back of Ghana's net. Ghana leveled it up in the second half, but John Brooks headed up the winner in the 86th minute. But it was a completely different story in the match between Iran and Nigeria in Curitiba. They became the first team to draw in this year's World Cup, playing out a rather dull 0-0. Now moving on to another record, the first hat trick in Brazil. The honor goes to Germany's Thomas Müller. Müller was also cutting up controversy after he got head-butted by Pepe. The Portuguese player, thinking Müller was play-acting, reacted angrily when the referee sent him packing with a red card. A man short before halftime and injuries on the Portuguese side, their star man Ronaldo couldn't work his usual magic on the pitch. Now let's turn our attention to Group H now, Korea's group. The first matches in Group H kick off this Tuesday for early Wednesday morning, Korea time. The lineup against Russia will pretty much be the same as the previous international friendly matches, headed by forward Park Geun-hye. Now the Korean squad is busy training for what will hopefully be a victory against the Russians. Let's now hear from the players themselves.
We focused on our game strategies and fine-tuning set pieces. The training was smooth in our base camp as well as here in Koyeba.
We've thoroughly monitored our opponent on video, so we are aware of their strengths and weaknesses. We are 100% ready for this match.
Now, once again, Korea's first group match against Russia is at 6 p.m. in Guyaba local time. That's at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday morning here in Korea. Before that, Belgium and Algeria will have already finished their match, so we'll have a better idea about what Korea needs to do to put themselves in the driving seat to advance the next round. Now, those of you planning to join the Red Devils cheer on the Korean squad, here are the go-to places, the spots you should head to watch the game with thousands of others in front of huge screens. The cheers will be rather subdued this year following the ferry disaster in April. A rather reserved mass cheer will be held at Gwanghwamun Square instead of the City Hall, and another spot is prepared at Yeongdong-dae Boulevard, that's in front of the business district of Samsung Station. Now, Korea's superstar Psy is set to perform his latest hit, Hangover, and hit other songs for the fans right there. We will bring you the live scenes of the cheering fans, and it's some sight to see, so stay tuned to ARIRANG for all the excitement throughout the day.
U.S. President Barack Obama has announced that more than 200 American troops will be deployed to Iraq as Sunni insurgents continue their offensive toward the capital city of Baghdad. For more, Paul is joining us, of course, from the News Center. Paul, Washington's pulled the trigger finally to send military personnel back to this country, and it looks like they're also turning to an unlikely ally for support in this crisis.
That's right. In a sign of the quickly deteriorating situation in Iraq, the U.S. government is reportedly considering working in some extent anyway with its traditional enemy, Iran. Keeping all options on the table, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says anything constructive to providing Iraq with stability will be considered, including airstrikes. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The United States could cooperate with its traditional foe, Iran, to stop Sunni militants, known as the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, from continuing their rampage through Iraq. In an interview with Yahoo News on Monday, Secretary of State John Kerry said that while Washington is not in active discussions with Tehran, it will not rule out anything constructive in providing stability to the region. Another U.S. official said the two sides could discuss the situation in Iraq on the sidelines of nuclear talks scheduled for Wednesday in Vienna. If it were to happen, cooperation between Washington and Tehran to contain the Iraqi crisis will mark the first time in more than a decade for the two countries to jointly undertake a common security purpose. Iran is a strong backer of the Shia government in Iraq and has signaled a readiness to cooperate with the U.S. to contain the crisis. Pentagon, however, made it clear that it would not engage with Iran on military activities in Iraq. As the situation spirals out of control, Kerry added that airstrikes are an option available to Washington, but no detailed plans on how to coordinate them have been drawn up yet. Meanwhile, President Obama on Monday has notified Congress that 275 U.S. troops will be deployed to Iraq to provide support and security for U.S. personnel and the American embassy in Baghdad. The troops are combat ready and will remain in Iraq until the security situation is brought under control. About 160 troops are already in the country, including 50 Marines and more than 100 Army soldiers. Radical militants from the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant have seized large parts of northern Iraq over the last several days, threatening to dismember Iraq and unleash all-out sectarian warfare. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
Now, turning now to the American Midwest, where a pair of deadly tornadoes have ripped through the state of Nebraska, killing at least one person so far. Paul, what's causing this deadly weather?
Well, the National Storm Prediction Center says these swarms of tornadoes are part of what they're calling a supercell thunderstorm system, which has cut through a path in northeastern Nebraska. We're seeing wind speeds reaching up to 265 kilometers per hour and destructive hail as large as baseballs. Among the several communities hit hardest by the severe weather was the town of Pilger, home to roughly 350 residents. Authorities say massive twisters touched down on Monday, destroying several homes and damaging half the town. Health services say one person has died, while 16 others are in critical condition. Nebraska Governor Dave Heineman has declared a state of emergency for the region. This as emergency crews scramble to dig for victims who are trapped under the rubble.
Now, turning now to Europe, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang's arrived in Britain in his first official visit to that country since taking office last year. We're talking about China's #2 leader. What's on the agenda for him?
Well, upon his arrival in London, Premier Li said China and Britain face an important opportunity to move forward bilateral relations into a new phase. It's a major diplomatic event as the two sides are marking the 10th anniversary of a comprehensive strategic partnership. According to Chinese state media, a series of joint economic deals worth $30 billion will also be signed in sectors such as high-speed rail and nuclear energy. During his 3-day stay in Britain, Li will meet with Prime Minister David Cameron as well as Queen Elizabeth II. He will then travel to Greece on the second leg of his European tour.
And finally, Paul, General Motors has announced another massive recall this time due to a problem with this time its ignition system. Now, GM's issued more than 8 major recalls this year alone. How many cars are we talking about this time?
Well, this latest recall by GM affects nearly 3.2 million vehicles sold in the United States between 2000 and 2014. In a company statement, GM said the vehicles were being recalled because of a faulty ignition switch, which they say can accidentally place it out of the run position. This means a driver could bump the keys, potentially causing the engine, power steering, and power brakes to shut off. GM also said the airbags may not deploy in the event of a crash if the ignition switch was out of the run position. GM has now recalled more than 17 million cars this year alone, which is more than the car maker sold in all of 2013. Chetty?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for those reports, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. It wasn't all that long ago when we were talking about the booming Korean film industry, but it looks like after a record 2012 and 2013, Korean movies are not shining as much so far this year. Our Kwon-soo tells us more.
Korean movies have been less popular than Hollywood movies in the domestic market so far this year, turning over a trend that's developed in recent years. No Tears for the Dead and Man on High Heels are Korean movies that were released earlier this month and star well-established actors like Jang Dong-gun and Cha Seung-won. Despite being produced by entertainment giants CJ Entertainment and Lotte Entertainment, they have failed to receive much attention. According to the Korean Film Council on Tuesday, No Tears for the Dead and Man on High Heels have so far attracted 570,000 and 310,000 viewers respectively, which pales in comparison to the Hollywood action movie Edge of Tomorrow, which has drawn 3 million. In 2012, ticket sales for domestic movies surpassed the 100 million mark for the first time. And for 2 consecutive years, Korean films were more popular than those from Hollywood. In the first half of 2014, Hollywood movies got the better of Korean films by 5.6 percentage points. Experts say Korean movies are suffering from the lack of a major hit. Miss Granny, released in January, is the only one that qualifies so far after drawing more than 4 million viewers. There were 4 of these super hits all of last year. Film critic Chung Ji-wook thinks the reason may be a lack of creativity. Whereas films last year tapped into creative concepts, he says domestic films so far this year have depended more on their star power. With the year nearly half over, there are concerns that the domestic film market may not surpass the 100 million mark. Kwon-soo, ARIRANG News.
You'd be hard-pressed to see anyone walking on the streets of Seoul wearing Korea's traditional hanbok clothing these days, but not that long ago, Koreans from all walks of life wore it on a daily basis. And our Park Ji-won reports a new center aims to breathe new life into the hanbok.
People wearing traditional Korean hanbok clothing gather at Seoul Station 2A4, a former train station turned art gallery. They have descended here in their special attire to celebrate the launch of the Hanbok Advancement Center, a governmental center with an aim of promoting the traditional clothing.
We are very grateful that a center whose sole aim is to promote hanbok has finally been established.
With the establishment of the Hanbok Center, the government hopes it pumps new life into the nation's dying culture of wearing the traditional clothing.
The center aims to make hanbok, which is the symbol of Korean culture, something the public wants to buy and wear, so that ultimately we can share the culture with the world.
The center will launch diverse projects to promote hanbok, including hosting educational classes on the traditional attire and holding designer contests that discover new takes on hanbok. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
We now go to Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center for a weather conditions updates. Now, Bo-kyung, I hear the monsoons finally hit Jeju.
That's right, and that's why it's raining there at the moment. Also, a couple of hours ago here in Seoul, we got to see lightning and thunder due to instability in the atmosphere. And it looks like this instability will lead to about 5 to 20 millimeters of precipitation through later tonight. Shifting our focus for a bit on Wednesday, 6 p.m. local time, which is about 7 a.m. Korea time, Team Korea will finally kick off its first match with Russia. And nature is on our side because just in time for the game, showers will give way to sunny skies in Brazil while cloudy skies are forecast here in Seoul. However, keep in mind that heavy showers will move in over the the capital here in Seoul, so an umbrella is a must if you're headed outdoors in the evening. Taking a look at tomorrow's readings, Seoul tops out at 29 degrees, while Daegu and Gwangju hit 31. On to other places, Daejeon reaches 28, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang peak at 19. That's your weather for this hour, but I'll be back with more after 10.
Bo-kyung, thank you very much, as always. And that wraps up this edition of ARIRANG News at 8. Thanks for watching.